Picture a giant puzzle that, once you put it together, completely changes how you view our entire civilization. Today, we're going way back to the deepest origins of human society, and we're doing this not just to understand the past, but to figure out exactly how the framework of our modern world was put together in the first place.
So, right off the bat, we run into this massive paradox. Women have obviously been central to the building of civilization, right? But their experience is practically missing from the historical record. Think about it. Women are, and literally always have been, at least half of humankind. They've shared the world and its work equally with men, and they helped preserve collective memory and oral traditions, folklore, and myth. Yet, when we read the grand narratives of our past, women are somehow positioned as marginal. It's almost as if they were unessential to the truly historic pursuits of humanity. How in the world did that happen?
To crack this case, we're going to unpack some groundbreaking source material by historian Gerda Lerner. We'll be treating her monumental book, The Creation of Patriarchy, like a detective's manual for this explainer. We're going to sift through archaeological data, anthropological theories, and ancient history to uncover not just if patriarchy has always existed, but exactly how and why it actually came into being.
Okay, here's our roadmap to navigate through all this dense anthropology. First, we'll look at women in history. Second, theories of male dominance. Third, the matriarchy debate. Fourth, we'll outline a new working hypothesis. And finally, we'll look at the exchange of women. We are moving all the way from debunking old myths to revealing a totally new way to view the past. Starting with Section 1, Women and History. Let's tackle the fundamental problem of how we even define the past.
Because how we define the past completely dictates who gets to be a part of it. There's a really crucial distinction here between history with a lowercase h and history with an uppercase H. Women have always made history, the unrecorded past of human events. They were right there, inventing basketry, developing horticulture, basically ensuring the survival of the species. But they were systematically excluded from making history with a capital H, which is the recorded and interpreted past. That meaning-giving enterprise? It started with the invention of writing in ancient Mesopotamia. And from that point on, it was mostly men, priests, royal servants, clerks, who got to select which events were worth recording and how they should be interpreted. They established a lens that claimed to be universal, but was actually entirely male-focused.
Lerner beautifully illustrates this dynamic using a theatrical stage metaphor, which I absolutely love. Imagine a play. The play obviously can't go on without both male and female performers, right? Neither contributes more or less to the actual daily reality of the performance. But the stage set itself? Well, that is conceived, painted, and defined by men. This brilliantly highlights that just getting an equal part on stage doesn't make the actors truly equal, not as long as the whole production is controlled by one group. Men have essentially written the script, directed the show, and assigned themselves the most heroic, interesting leads, leaving women with the supporting roles. It's just incredibly unfair casting. Even if women occasionally step in to play a lead role, they're still operating under an umbrella of dominance where the very terms of qualification were set by guys.
Now, to understand how these rules were cast in the first place, we absolutely must separate our biological bodies from the cultural constructs layered on top of them. Sex is the biological given. It's your anatomy. Gender, on the other hand, is a cultural construct. It's the definition of behavior deemed appropriate for those sexes at a very specific time in a specific society. Just think about the color pink. It used to be considered a strong masculine color, but now it's culturally assigned to girls. Recognizing that gender is a historical, cultural product is step one to realizing that the roles we play aren't just immutable laws of nature.
Moving to Section 2, Theories of Male Dominance. So, who are the prime suspects in our historical detective story? If male dominance is a cultural construct, how did it become so universal? We have to look impartially at two major schools of thought here. On one side, we have the traditionalist or biological view. This camp argues that male dominance is just a natural byproduct of physical strength, the whole man-hunter dynamic. It suggests that because women were tied down by childbearing and nursing, men had to take on the dangerous roles of hunting and defending the tribe, naturally making them the protectors and leaders. On the flip side, we have the Marxist view. Yup, Friedrich Engels, who co-authored the Communist Manifesto, actually had a theory on this. He argued that early societies were completely egalitarian and that the historic defeat of the female sex happened suddenly when private property emerged. According to him, men wanted to pass their wealth, like herds of animals, down to their legitimate heirs, which meant they suddenly needed to strictly control women's sexuality and enforce monogamy. All right, Section 3, the matriarchy debate. Because if patriarchy was created, it naturally begs the question, was there ever a time when women were in charge?
People have been searching for proof of ancient matriarchies for a long time, but we need to be clear about definitions. A true matriarchy wouldn't just mean women were respected. It would mean women held the exact same structural, political, and public power over men that men currently hold over women in a patriarchy. But when you carefully analyze the anthropological and historical data, it reveals that while highly egalitarian societies absolutely existed, and many ancient cultures fiercely worshipped female goddesses, a true mirror image matriarchy probably never existed. Reversing the power dynamic just isn't what happened, and searching for it might mean we're looking for the wrong clues entirely.
Let's look at some hard skeletal data from the Neolithic settlement of Çatalhöyük in modern-day Turkey to ground this. Çatalhöyük is famous for its goddess worship and signs of a fairly egalitarian society where men and women shared a lot of tasks. Yet, even in early, supposedly egalitarian communities, the biological toll on women was just brutal. Men lived an average of about 34 years, women just under 30. Because human infants are born completely helpless and need years of nursing, and because infant mortality was just sky high back then, early group survival demanded that most young women spend their short lives in a constant physically devastating cycle of pregnancy and nursing.
Section 4. A new working hypothesis. If male dominance isn't just biological destiny, and there were no ancient matriarchies violently overthrown in a Marxist revolution, how exactly did we get here?
Well, Lerner's working hypothesis is pretty groundbreaking. She reveals that patriarchy was absolutely not a single, sudden revolution. It wasn't an event at all. It was a slow, creeping process that developed over nearly 2,500 years in the ancient Near East. It shifted gradually through the Paleolithic era, evolved as people settled down in Neolithic towns, accelerated drastically when the agricultural revolution hit, and finally locked into place through law and culture with the rise of the archaic states. Walking through this chronological timeline, you can see exactly how the basic necessity of survival slowly mutated into a rigid, culturally enforced structure. It started with functional mothering, a pure biological necessity, where women gathered food close to home so they could nurse, while men roamed further out to hunt. But as tribes grew and started competing for resources, intertribal warfare kicked off, which elevated the status of the male warrior. To broker peace between these warring tribes, groups began exchanging their own members. And because women were seen as a way to assimilate into a new tribe by having children, they became the pawns of exchange. Finally, as plow agriculture took over, human labor became the absolute most valuable asset you could have, which led to the outright commodification of a woman's reproductive capacity. Which brings us to Section 5, the exchange of women. This is really the climax of our explainer, where the structural trap of patriarchy finally clicks into place. Anthropologist Claude Lévi-Strauss has a fascinating, if somewhat chilling, take on this. He notes that incest taboos were incredibly functional. They enforce what he calls the supreme rule of the gift, meaning you have to give away your own kin to build social ties. By forcing groups to marry outside their immediate family, it turned women into the very first form of trade to ensure intertribal peace and forge alliances. In this system, the elder males negotiated the terms. The social relations dictated that men had rights over their female kin, and women were moved between groups not as active partners in the exchange, but as the literal objects being exchanged. Okay, so here is the massive paradigm shift you should take away from all this. Traditional economic theory always suggested that men invented private property first, and then subordinated women to protect it. But the source material suggests it was actually the exact opposite. The appropriation by men of women's sexual and reproductive capacity happened prior to the formation of private property. Think about it. In agricultural societies, more children meant more workers for your fields, so a woman's ability to produce children became the ultimate resource. The commodification of reproduction, literally controlling women to produce labor, laid the very foundation for the whole concept of private property and the earliest class-based archaic states. Men basically learned how to dominate other groups and create slaves by first practicing dominance over the women of their own group.
So what does this all mean for us today? We've seen that patriarchy isn't some eternal natural law. It's a historical creation, forged out of ancient survival needs that gradually hardened into cultural dominance. And because this system was constructed by humans over millennia, it is absolutely not an immutable law of nature. It can be dismantled by the exact same historical process. If men and women jointly built this civilization, what happens when women step out of the supporting roles, completely reject the old stage set, and demand to co-write the play? Now that we know exactly how the script of history was written, how will we direct the next act?